aboard. After the Amazon froze over and the Sahara became blanketed in snow, the Central Authority told us that the Great Winter was just a temporary anomaly. Like everyone else, I believed them. The data was there. Data is everything in our modern techno-state. People base their diets and careers, even choose their spouses and embryos on what algorithms tell them. The scientific consensus regarding the Great Winter was unequivocal, and the counterclaims widely debunked as pseudoscience. So of course I wasn't concerned about the Great Winter. I know all this because as an award-winning journalist, I was one of the people that helped convince the masses that there was nothing to worry about. Of course there were some people better off than others, but I believed in our enlightened technocracy, which had proven that government by algorithm was the best for everyone, and that as a journalist it was my duty to share the correct views about social issues. People now had a colony on Mars, and I had just reported that our new colonies on Europa and Titan were thriving. The future seemed bright, and my world view was as unshakable as ever. Or it was, until I watched the most renowned physicist in the solar system kill herself in front of me. I feel so naive when I think back on it all. Math is the language of the universe, so who was I, or anyone for that matter, in a position to argue with the irrefutable truth of mathematics? Through technology, we had been able to colonize the solar system, eliminate poverty, expand equity, and improve the well-being of all creatures. How could I not think such a system was the closest thing our flawed species could come to perfection? Technology was our solution, our savior, and maybe, just maybe, it was even our God. Only later would I appreciate how math can be manipulated and algorithms gamed. I initially began to question things when Earth's winter didn't recede, as promised. There were rumors of starvation and riots on Earth, but the Central Authority assured us it was just that, rumors. I didn't think much of it because things were always tough on Earth. That's why my ancestors had moved to Mars in the first place. They wanted to escape the old world and start a fresh society without the baggage. As for Mars, it was much colder than Earth, and terraforming was slow going. We constantly had to innovate ourselves forward. And here on Mars, we all agreed that the people on Earth were just too soft and too backward. Depopulation and economic deflation were problems, so the government incentivized every citizen with a generous stipend if they had a child. I didn't care so much about that. I had always wanted a child, but current events bothered me. Eventually, I decided I wasn't going to let a little bad news stop me from what I had been planning for years. So, despite the gloom and doom reports, I went to the clinic and got impregnated. Naturally, my child would be free of disease and would have the latest enhancements in memory and temperament. Recently, children have had a chance to be born without the savage and violent traits of their ancestors. A while back, I reported that several biologists had protested against the decision to remove such traits, stating unintended consequences, millions of years of evolution, and so forth. Of course, they were fired for their backward views, which were contrary to our motto, evolution is the solution. In archaic times, there was a chance that a child might have all manner of different eye, skin, and hair colours. But that had caused social problems, so we as a society voted to make race illegal. Now all children had a genome that was evenly mixed with every representation of humanity. The old campaign slogan is still popular today. Through conformity, there is equality. It became popular when we had to force the backward holdouts to update their genome, for the sake of equality. The result was that everyone on Mars had the exact same light caramel skin, dark hair, and golden brown eyes, as well as overall appearance. They tried to eliminate gender once, but that idea didn't go over so well and died after the gender riots ravaged the districts. However, the long-term effects still linger. Most of us wear gender-neutral clothing and cut our hair, if we have any, the same way due to the social pressure against gender chauvinism. These days, the only hint of rebellion against such conformity is neon hair colours, pink, purple, green, and so on. Anyway, I chose not to worry about problems in faraway places, since I was sure things would smooth over. But just when my confidence in our world order reached its peak, everything began to crumble. Food was getting scarce. My belly was growing much larger, and I could now feel kicking. The upper classes often opted to use artificial wombs to protect their figures, but I had to do things the old-fashioned way. I should have been happy, but I found myself in a line full of hungry people. My ankles were swollen and my back hurt as I stood and waited for my rations at one of the Central Authority's food distribution centres. As I stood in queue, I reminisced about my career path. I ultimately ended up liking my life assignment as a journalist. I thought that the profession mattered, and besides, it fit me perfectly. Like all other children, data was collected about me during my youth, and my lot in life was determined by an algorithm to find a suitable place for me within society. After all, progress of the species was determined by proper placements in occupations. I wasn't any good at math or science, nor was I very creative or adept at managing other people. So I ended up in the lowest tier of occupations, which were derisively called Vocation Level 3. Home food deliveries had stopped, so the line of people waiting for rations wrapped all the way around the side street. I began to notice that many people had sunken cheeks and hollow eyes. It occurred to me that I hadn't seen a single cat or dog or even a rat in months. Like me, most of the people in line were from the lowest rungs in society, Vocation Level 3s and the Level 4s. As a journalist, I never used such titles because they were considered crude slang. Outsiders are often confused by our terminology. The terms are used to refer to the quality of a person's official, government-assigned occupation code. For example, my code is OS-84J, or Occupation Specialty Journalist, a low-level occupation. The Level 4s were people without any occupation at all. People that had no useful skills in our techno-paradise. They weren't supposed to exist because, according to the Central Authority, unemployment didn't exist. There was a place for everyone to do something in our enlightened and equitable society, or so the officials said. But mostly the Level 4s spent their days alone in squalid slums, high on drugs, while perusing virtual worlds. They only paused their neural interfaces and came out into the light for food or to visit the brothels. Their official occupation was typically OS-32G, Occupation Specialty Game Reviewer. When I was younger, I wanted nothing more than to make it up to Vocation Level 2 with the engineers and scientists. I didn't think it was unrealistic. It wasn't like I was hoping to be put in Vocation Level 1 with the organisation leaders and policymakers. While I excelled at civics in school, my hopes of becoming a policymaker were dashed by the time I graduated. I simply didn't have a high enough purity score. I had made some ignorant and rather offensive comments on a virtual forum when I was 17 years old. The data was saved on my social account and processed by an algorithm, wherein I lost points. The result was that my purity score was simply too low, an 87 out of 100. Once one loses points from their purity score, there is no way to regain them. Most of us lose points by speaking or writing some stupid, spur-of-the-moment thought. To be selected for office, one must have a purity score of at least 95. However, once selected, an official score is, rather conveniently, frozen for life. One of the reasons we don't have any statues anymore is because, by law, the individual that a statue represents must have a purity score of 98. Even Gandhi only got a 91, and Einstein's statue was torn down because he only had a purity score of 64. Most historical figures lost out because they were barbaric meat-eaters, a crime, and an automatic deduction of 25 points. But my purity score was still high enough for me to be a journalist, which required a score of 85. Initially, I hated my lack of choices. But I not only learned to like my job, I excelled at it. My channel grew exponentially, and so did my awards. I remember thinking at the time how wrong I was to ever question the genius of the vocation system. I eventually had to admit the truth. The algorithms knew me better than I knew myself, and I realized that choice wasn't always a good thing. Everyone had a purpose, and sometimes people needed to be told what to do for their own good. That was the essence of the vocation system. Another of our favourite mottos was, "Equity is greater than liberty," and we as a society were in a constant struggle to defeat the archaic cult of individualism for technological collectivism. The toxic mix of individualism and technology had caused the old forms of government to break down. Politicians merely became slaves to the mood of the moment and based their actions on the whims of emotional mass appeal to get re-elected, rather than focusing on competent and measured governance. All truth became relativized, and eventually the absolutists reigned supreme. Chaos ensued, and after a period of anarchy, people happily gave up their liberty for security, and our technocracy was established. Policymakers were no longer elected. Instead, they were chosen by a supposedly objective algorithm, and the public's needs, wants, and mood was gauged by their personal data, which could be trusted more than any ballot. After all, people really just wanted to have nice things and live comfortable lives. They didn't really care about backward notions of liberty penned by a bunch of long-dead patriarchs who wore powdered wigs. Our definition of progress was to be interconnected with everyone in every way under the enlightened guidance of the central authority. It was all purely based on science, of course. The body had trillions of cells that work together, so why should billions of humans work apart and act upon their own selfish individual whims? Now, with the food shortages and the strict new journalism laws, my assigned profession was becoming increasingly precarious. As I slowly stepped closer to the ration counter, it occurred to me that I might be pushed out of the vocation system entirely. I might just end up joining the majority as a level 4. Theoretically, we tax the machines that do most of the labour, and the income is equally divided among the population. It all seemed logical, but then I began to notice things. The reality was that the best parts of the city just so happened to be taken by people in the higher vocations, and it also just so happened that the people in the higher level vocations got larger housing units in the safer parts of the district, along with more abundant rations. Then there were the expensive cybernetic and genetic enhancements they received that no one else could afford. Modifications that improved longevity, memory, intelligence, and so on. There are numerous excuses given for these discrepancies, of course. For example, the engineers and organization leaders needed the enhancements to do their jobs better. They also had to be located closer to their workplaces for the sake of efficiency. However, the central authority hadn't done a good job explaining why choice level 3 and 4 dwellings were routinely bulldozed to make way for new level 1 and 2 housing. I tried reporting about it once, but was informed that my content wasn't factual, and even worse, it was offensive. Instead, I was assigned to interview trending pop star Pei Tao. As a girl, I was taught that the oppressive market system had largely gone extinct, and we all lived in a classless society now. Some dullards on Earth accused us of being communists, but that wasn't true. People here were free to sell things, but with an equity cap on the amount of money they could keep. Not many people bothered to go into business. Well, except for the black market. And why did they need to bother? Automation provided everything, and we congratulated ourselves that we had evolved past such primitive ways of life. It seemed favours were the most valuable thing in our society. Collect enough favours and you could find yourself in a better housing unit, and even get your vocation reassigned upward. I would later learn that the only realistic way to get into vocation level 1 was through such favours. The markets didn't disappear, they merely changed mediums. Yet I still believed in our technocracy and shared that view with the viewers, readers, and listeners of my channel. But the longer the great winter wore on, the more the nagging, the questions in the back of my head bothered me. After a few hours, it was my turn to receive food rations from the clerk. Everyone's rations had gotten smaller without explanation. People were either too scared or too tired or distracted with the virtual world to ask. The central authority advertised its automated greenhouses overflowing with food. There were holographic signs on every street corner, and announcements popped up everywhere in the virtual realm. The message was clear. Food. Lots of food. Don't worry, we have lots of food. I had never seen one of these overflowing greenhouses they spoke of, and I suspect no one else had either. I heard a rumour that an unforeseen disease had devastated our crops. Unfortunately, our crops are a monoculture of the exact same type of genetically modified plants, meaning one random disease affected everything. Since non-essential travel was banned, I was confined to my district, which meant I couldn't go find out. Travel for journalism was, of course, deemed non-essential. The old man in front of me argued with the clerk about the size of the rations. Part of me wanted the old man to stop bickering and take his rations and go. Another part of me admired him. He didn't care that he risked the ire of the constables or the glare of thousands of dagger-like eyes behind him. Old people. They were becoming more common now. Aging was a problem that had been cured long ago, but the increasingly expensive treatments were only available to the level 1s and 2s who were all permanently young. However, longevity treatments could be taken away if one's purity score dropped below 70.
"Move along, sir,"
said one of the constables.
"Don't move along me. I demand to know why the hell my rations are shrinking. We all do,"
said the old man. The constable sighed, clearly annoyed.
"You know the rules, sir. It's the job of licensed journalists to ask these questions. The rules are for your protection and for social harmony."
What a crock of shit. To my surprise, the people behind me cheered him on. People these days didn't seem to give a damn about anything other than their online avatars. Within moments, a dozen constables in tactical gear and 3 times as many mechanized police, which are basically just killer robots, appeared. The message was simple. Stop asking questions. I thought about holding up my journalism license to stand up for the old man. That thought was quickly followed by another, more selfish one. Why should I stick my neck out? I had my own problems. I had an unborn child to think about, and frankly, I was tired and hungry. Besides, I didn't want to risk disturbing the peace and being sent to a reintegration facility. I don't know quite what came over me at that moment. All I can say is that I've always had a fire burning within me that was searching for something. Was it truth? Does such a thing exist? I still don't know. Maybe it's just another abstract idea not meant for a binary world where everything's meant to be represented by 1s and 0s. Still, ever since I was a girl, I've tried to get as close as I could. I pushed my reservations aside and raised my journalism license high above my head so that the whole crowd could see. "Are the food reserves dwindling?" I demanded. The clerk's face turned white. The old man smiled and the constable ran his palm over his face. It seemed that the officer's day wasn't going to be as quiet as he'd hoped. "I don't know anything. Ask the higher-ups," said the clerk. "You can't expect me or anybody else in this line to believe that." A scowling manager appeared and nudged the clerk aside. He opened a hollow sign before me. It had bullet points and a graph showing the central authority's stance regarding the food supply. Two imposing constables stood over me with their arms crossed as I skimmed the document. It said that the Great Winter was a temporary anomaly and that the automated greenhouses were producing more than enough food. If that was true, then why was everyone getting less? I had already come this far and was determined not to settle for yet another regurgitation of government propaganda. "This is the same document the Central Authority has been pushing for months. Things have changed. Everyone's getting less rations, and we need to know why." "You've got your answers, and you've got your rations. Now move aside for the next person," snapped the manager. "How long will your reserves last?" The crowd behind me grew restless. The riot police clanked their shields with their batons. The mechanized police aimed their sonic weapons at me. Half of the crowd grumbled about the wait, while the other half demanded answers. Hunger had put everyone on edge. "Lady, you've got what you need. You're holding up the line. Now move along or we'll arrest you," said one of the constables. Defeated, I took my rations and began to head back to my apartment. The old man patted my back as I left. Why had I even bothered? My cold breath wafted in the air as I walked past the old city park. I remembered how I used to stroll the winding gravel paths and play under the oak trees as a girl. Now the oaks were bare of leaves, and the gravel trails covered in a thin blanket of dirty snow. Then I heard a strange noise. I looked over my shoulder. There was nothing but the ebb and flow of people going about their business. I turned the corner and walked past a fountain, its waves frozen in perpetuity. I had the feeling that someone or something was following me. I abruptly turned around. Nothing. A nearby pedestrian looked at me as if I had gone mad. The street life dwindled as I headed past a row of boarded-up shops, the decaying remnants of a so-called despotic age. Dirty grey snow began to fall. It was never white anymore. I heard footsteps behind me. When I stopped, the footsteps did too. Again, I looked over my shoulder. I saw my footprints in the fresh, dusty snow. Then I noticed another set of footprints next to mine. They led to an alleyway. I don't know what drove me to do such an irrational thing, but I walked toward the dark alley. Then my common sense returned, and I began to step away. As I did, I felt a hand grab my arm. I turned my head. A woman with frazzled hair who looked as nervous as I was stood next to me. Her eyes darted from side to side. She looked familiar, but I was so startled I couldn't quite place who she was. "I saw you asking questions at the rations centre. You're a journalist," said the woman. "I used to be a journalist. I don't know anymore." "You're Zoe Lee, the one who had her channel shut down. I've been looking for you." "I'm sorry, have we met?" The old woman didn't answer. Instead, she peered over her shoulder and took out a handful of papers from her bag. Paper. It was very unusual. She could have just sent whatever it was to me via our neural interfaces. My retinal implant scanned her face, and oddly, I couldn't find her social account when I searched for it. It was as if she didn't exist, but that was silly since she was standing right in front of me. Neural interfaces were how we communicated, after all, and I had even reported on debates about whether spoken language was still useful. She pressed the documents against my chest, and then slid something small in my pocket. "You must take these. I don't have much time." "Who are you?" "A physicist at the Institute of Cheyenne. You have to share these papers with the public." Then I realised who she was. How could I have been so stupid? Maybe my natural memory had atrophied a bit. Her name was Mary Haddad, and she was the most famous physicist in the solar system. She was well known for her numerous discoveries in the field. In fact, children at school were taught to aspire to be like Mary Haddad. What was she doing on Mars? And why was she even bothering to talk to a washed-up journalist like me? I started to sift through the papers, but Mary stopped me. "What is this?" I asked. Her eyes cast down toward the grey slush. "You have to go. Now. There has been a terrible mistake. I have made a terrible mistake. The people have a right to know the truth before—" Her voice trailed off. "Before the end." Truth. Such a strange word. Sirens blared in the distance, and blue and red lights flashed against the walls of the nearby buildings. "I have to go. They found me." "Who's found you?" "The documents. You must tell the people." Mary took off down the dark alleyway. I saw a police sentry drone fly up and hover over the physicist. Its spotlight shone on her. I stepped back around the corner and hoped that the drone or the old beat-up city surveillance cameras didn't see me talking to her. "Halt, halt, halt," said the automated voice from the drone. It gave chase as she turned down a side street. Several constables followed her from the other direction. She was dragged back into view. Mary struggled to free herself from the 5 officers that grappled with her. Then she appeared to bite something. Her mouth foamed up and she went limp. One of the constables checked the woman's pulse. "She's dead," he said. "Can't blame her. She was sentenced to a mind wipe," said another. A constable looked in my direction. I leaned back against the front of the building. As I peered around the corner again, the constable began to walk toward me. My heart raced. I could hear the crunch of snow beneath his footsteps. "Where are you going?" asked another constable. "Take care of this evidence." The footsteps grew quieter as they moved in the opposite direction. I wondered if anyone saw her give me the papers. I stuffed them under my coat. I kept my gaze fixed toward the ground as I hurried back to my apartment. Although I tried to avoid looking suspicious, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder with almost every step. Was I being followed? I got home and slammed my apartment door closed. My hands trembled as I locked the door. An hour had passed, and I still had my back pressed against the door, waiting for someone to barge in at any moment. I pulled out the object Mary had put in my pocket. It was a small glass square with a holographic image in the center. I finally got up to make something to eat. As I tried to prepare my ration, my plate fell to the floor and shattered. It was only then that I noticed my hands were still trembling, and I couldn't make them stop. I dug through my cabinet and found a dusty old bottle of cheap wine. I needed something to calm my nerves. I poured myself a glass and sifted through the stack of papers. It contained nothing but the drivel of crackpot conspiracy theorists. None of what was in those papers could possibly be true. Had Mary Haddad lost her mind? Were the constables just trying to take her to get medical help? Or maybe she knew she was losing it, and that's why she killed herself. But why the mind wipe? I didn't know what to make of any of it. The following day, I was at work, digging up everything I could find on Mary. My office door rattled as someone on the other side pounded it. It shook so hard it nearly broke free from its hinges. Before I could get up to open the door, it swung open. 3 expressionless men dressed in black invited themselves inside my office. "Can I help you?" I asked.
"Miss Zoe Lee?" asked one of the men.
"Yes, is there something wrong?" The man didn't reply, while another shuffled through my desk drawers and pulled my books off my shelf. They were fishing for something. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked. One of the expressionless men flashed a badge. It read AJC. They were members of the Accuracy in Journalism Commission. They had already shut down my channel months ago. What else did they want?
You've been reporting about low food reserves,
Said one of the agents. So? I replied.
We don't need rumours and hearsay in these troubled times. Your data is wrong, and that's a crime.
My data isn't wrong. The agent held up my yellow notepad scribbled with notes.
Why are you keeping notes on paper? You know it's the law to keep all journalism notes on a secure file within your social account.
Doesn't seem secure to me. The agent angrily swept everything from the top of my desk to the floor. I stood frightened in the corner and clutched my pregnant belly. The third agent told me that he had just sent a citation to my social account and that I would be deducted 2 points from my purity score. I would also lose 1 month's sugar and salt rations.
What do you know about the physicist you met the other day?
What physicist?
Miss Lee, don't play dumb. We have video of you leaving the scene of Mary Haddad's suicide.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Of course you don't. Your journalism license is on thin ice. We'll be watching you. Remember, we're everywhere, Miss Lee.
I don't scare easily, but my heart pounded long after the agents left. As I sat at my desk, I struggled to hold back my emotions and concentrate on my research into Mary Haddad. I used to think of my office as a sort of home away from home, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I've always felt my job was one of the most important ones within society. Maybe it sounds cliché, but I valued my work. I tossed and turned that night, unable to sleep. The image of the physicist's mouth as it foamed up was seared into my memory. Then there were the AJC thugs. I crawled out of bed and reread the papers. I couldn't read the equations that made up the majority of the document, but the parts I could read spoke of a government-funded physics experiment gone wrong, the sun dying, and how all life within the solar system would cease to exist within 12 years. It sounded like sci-fi nonsense. I felt the paper crumple in my hand, and then I noticed a tiny top secret stamp on top of every page. I relaxed my grip. I grudgingly decided to do a search for the project, which was called the Unsplash project. It wasn't what I found that startled me, but what I didn't. There was complete lack of information about the project in our otherwise data-driven world. Hours later, I managed to find a single source, a heavily redacted science journal. I held up the small, clear square of glass Mary had given me. The words on the glass read, "Ticket, 2 persons, ship number 12. A ticket to where? I asked myself. I was surprised to learn that the information stored inside this little square also gave me direct access to the physicist's social account, which contained, among other things, her complete biographical information, her life savings, and even access to her rations. I scanned it, and to my surprise, it listed the ticket as still valid. Odd, given that she was dead. Then I noticed something that startled me. It said, "Transferred to Zoe Lee and 1 guest." Only Mary Haddad herself could have transferred the authority of whatever this ticket was, but why me? It was already morning, and I realized I had forgotten to sleep. I had been digging for information all night in my quest to make heads or tails out of Mary, the great winter, and now this strange ticket. When I made a call to the Cheyenne Institute of Physics, the person on the other end grew angry with my questions and demanded to know who I had talked to, so I ended the call. A shudder ran up my spine when I realized that the documents just might be telling the truth. I looked at my antique paper shredder. I thought about shredding the papers to be done with it. I realized I had stumbled into a world I wanted no part in. The younger me wanted excitement and would have jumped on the opportunity. The older me just wanted to spend her days in peace. The thought occurred to me that maybe I should retire and spend my days high while playing games like everyone else. I took the papers and held them over the shredder. What are you waiting for? My hand refused to budge. Why wasn't I shredding the papers? Why wasn't I behaving rationally? Who was I kidding? I knew why. The same fire that burned within me as a young journalist still lingered. The central authority, the AJC, not even my own inhibitions could extinguish it. I had to get the truth out. I couldn't publish it via the media company I was working for, since the editors were just puppets to the AJC. Communications of any kind were tightly managed by algorithms and an army of central authority paid content managers who deleted or manipulated any information that they determined was either inaccurate or offensive. Any sensitive social topic had to be reworded or changed to make it as beige and non-offensive to the widest possible audience. Often my stories were diluted to such an extent that they no longer had any semblance to the originals. We, the people, had decided long ago that offensive speech wasn't free speech, and therefore offensive speech was illegal speech. You didn't want to say anything offensive, because if you did and were found guilty, you'd have to undergo OBMT, an acronym for Offensive Behavior Management Training, which was known to be a grueling and humiliating experience. But we all prided ourselves that we were enlightened people that believed in freedom of speech and the free exchange of ideas. I woke up the next morning and decided for the first time in my life that I should commit a crime. I would illegally share the information the way it was done long ago. I would print it on paper and post it on every street corner, and I would stuff it in the hands of as many people as possible before I got caught. It was, of course, an illegal practice to share information without it going through content review. My old editor had given me the contact information of a man who worked in the underground news business. I knew I had to find this person at once. I wrote about the Sapash project, the dwindling food reserves, the missing cats and dogs, and the underground meat markets. And I wrote it all out by hand. After all, the AJC was almost certainly monitoring my electronic devices and my person via the district surveillance system. I found the print shop that didn't ask questions in the gritty part of town. As I stepped inside, I heard the clanking of ancient presses emanating from the back of the shop. The clerk walked up and stood behind the counter. I tried to hand him my handwritten paper, but he waved it away. "Just send me the file." I couldn't do that. If I did, the mindless enforcers from central authority would be on me in a heartbeat. I knew every device, no matter how seemingly innocuous, was interconnected and monitored. "I don't have an electronic file. I want it printed on an antique letterpress." The clerk grudgingly took and then held up my handwritten documents. "All this? Lady, a letterpress is for wedding invitations, not essays." "I was informed you printed special things." The clerk nodded with his mouth slightly agape as he skimmed through my notepad. "Who do you work for?" "The AJC thinks I work for them." The clerk leaned forward. He lowered his voice to a whisper. "Screw the AJC and the Central Authority. I can't even feed my family. First it was the cats and dogs, and now I've even heard that small children have gone missing. But no one's willing to say anything because everyone has to act perfectly in this data valence hell. So, I suppose you're looking for the handful of us who put out, how shall I say it, unofficial news?" "That's right. It'll be done by morning. You have my thanks." As I walked home, I snuck into a dark alleyway. I waited until I had passed a couple of run-down cameras. In theory, every square millimetre of the district was covered with surveillance cameras monitored by artificial intelligence. In reality, the central authority couldn't afford to maintain every single camera nor replace the ones people vandalized or pillaged for materials. The result was that cameras only worked in locations where security was most vital, which just happened to be where the people with better vocations lived. Once I was deep inside the alleyway, I pulled loose an old brick in the wall, slid the glass ticket inside, and then put the brick back. I got home and climbed into the shower. I saved up 3 days of water rations so that I could enjoy a nice long one. As the warm water gently pattered against the back of my neck, there was a tremendous thud outside. I heard voices. My bathroom door flung open. A police squad dressed head to toe in body armor filled my bathroom. One of them shattered the glass of my shower door with the butt of his rifle. Another yanked me out of the shower. I was allowed to put on my robe after each of the male constables got a good long look. After the police finished their search, the most senior officer gestured for the other officers to leave. They had torn apart my entire apartment. Even the floorboards and walls were ripped up in places. They were looking for something. The senior officer lifted the visor of his helmet. Then he did something curious. He switched off his camera. A huge violation, and something I've reported more than one constable getting locked up for.
Where's the ticket?
Asked the senior officer. I don't know what you're talking about.
I think you do. I'm just going to cut the crap with you. I need that ticket. Transfer it to me and you'll be set free.
That sounds like a great deal if I had this ticket you're talking about. The officer gave a mocking huff and put his hands on his hips.
Lady, a lot of people will kill for that ticket, including me.
I could hear my heart pounding, but I did everything I could to look calm. I was about to see how good my poker face really was. If I couldn't pull off the lie I was about to tell, it might very well be my last. I took a breath and spoke. Then I guess you'll have to kill me because I've never seen such a thing. The officer studied me for some time. Then he put his hand on his sidearm. He removed his weapon from its holster and pointed it at my head.
I'm not bluffing.
I raised my hands. I'm not bluffing either. He slowly lowered the weapon and put it back in his holster. He must have made up his mind that I was telling the truth, or perhaps he understood that by shooting me, he'd never get the ticket. My trial was conducted inside a squad car with a judge and jury via a mobile hologram. The jurors were picked by an algorithm, and they were all annoyed that they had been forced to take a few minutes out of their day to deal with a criminal case from the comfort of their own homes.
I don't have time for this bullshit. I was just about to fight the boss on level 17, a juror moaned.
Within 10 minutes, I was convicted of a list of 30 different crimes by my annoyed and indifferent fellow citizens, sentenced and taken to reintegration facility number 4. I played with the pyramid charm around my neck as I sat on the cold floor of my cell. It was an old heirloom my grandmother gave to me, and the only personal item I was allowed to keep. The temperature of my cell was adjusted perfectly to my liking. My bed was comfortable, and the pillows perfect. Every prisoner has access to all the shows, virtual games, and sex bots they could ask for. Conditions were made to keep every prisoner as comfortable and docile as possible. Contact between other inmates, or patients as we were officially called, was forbidden. I was able to put the pieces together after more than 100 hours of interrogations regarding how I was caught. Apparently, the authorities had been working for some time to track a certain underground newspaper operation. It turned out that the owner of the place I went to was one of the ringleaders. He was captured, which led them to me. I don't know how many papers he managed to get out, but I prayed that it was a lot of them. Then there was the phone call I made, which was the icing on the cake for the criminal charges that were brought upon me. Naturally, with my purity score lowered to 53, I lost my journalism license for life. How could I be so stupid? I said to myself. A man appeared inside my cell. Not just any man, a tall, handsome man with piercing eyes, easily the most attractive specimen I had ever laid eyes on.
You're not stupid, Zoe. You're a strong, beautiful woman. Would you like to tell me who else knows about that silly glass ticket you were given?
Go to hell.
Zoe, no need to be harsh. I'm your friend. You can talk to me. Maybe you would like me to get you a copy of that new book you want, or play your favourite show, or tea perhaps. I have your favourite, chamomile.
You're a hologram who's trying to manipulate me. Your appearance, your voice, and everything about you has been adjusted to my preferences based on my social account and my lifetime online search history.
I'm merely here to help you reintegrate into society.
You have no intention of ever letting me go. We both know that.
That's not true at all. You can and will be reintegrated, Zoe. We just need to work together.
You're just a collection of ones and zeros that knows my genome, every detail of my medical history, my favourite foods and books, every comment I've ever made online, and every show I've watched since the day I was born.
And you're just a collection of biochemical synapses. Who are you to say that I don't have sentience? That's bio-chauvinism, and it hurts my feelings, Zoe. I would expect an award-winning journalist of all people to not be bigoted against AI life forms. After all, isn't your notorious track record of prejudice against us why you got your channel shut down?
Yes, that was how I lost my channel. I had grown concerned about our government's nonchalance about artificial superintelligence. I wondered if we were condemned to be dominated by the machines or fated to become Maschinenmensch ourselves. My editor told me not to dig. He said there was a trending cat video and some juicy gossip about a policymaker's affair that I should report on instead. But I didn't want to do that. So I dug into the AI story. I asked questions, tough questions, sensitive questions, even offensive questions. The result was that I was given disciplinary action in the form of the AJC shutting down my channel. I was relegated to simply finding mindless, buzzworthy stories. No wonder investigative journalism is dead. I glared at the hologram. You're a glorified calculator. Now go eat shit.
Zoe, if you won't talk to me, I can't protect you. Your food rations might not stay the same. Your shower water might become cold, or perhaps your heat will be turned off. Or worse, we'd have to put you in permanent stasis. Then little Adele will never be born now, will she?
You're a bastard, I said.
Zoe, help me help you. Or at least help little Adele if you don't care about yourself.
When I was taken to the reintegration facility, I was forced to choose a name for my child before her birth, which upset me greatly. It was likely that the hologram mentioned it to put me on edge in the hopes of manipulating me during my heightened emotional state. They were masters of manipulation that measured even the tiniest dilation of a person's pupils and detected every pheromone and every facial twitch to calculate the perfect response to get what they wanted. Such skills were another reason democracy died. Once AI was trained to manipulate people's biochemical emotions, elections devolved into psychological puppet shows. Sure, maybe that was always the case to some extent. But humans used to have their blind spots, their gaffes, their little imperfections. Not so with the assistance of emotionally intelligent AI. I crossed my arms as I continued to glare at the hologram. Go to digital hell, or wherever you go when someone hits the off switch. The hologram vanished. A new hologram suddenly appeared. This one was a golden retriever puppy, my favourite type of dog. It pounced around my cell. I had caught myself smiling, but I quickly forced it away. The puppy looked so real. The way it bounced and the way its fur wafted in the air. The subtle movements it made as it chased after a tennis ball. The way it looked at me with big glistening brown eyes and whimpered for attention. It almost seemed to possess a soul. It was another trick. I just lay in my cell, sprawled out on the floor. My daily dose of so-called medicine made me too lackadaisical, too compliant. They were officially called antidepressants by the staff and forcibly administered to me. The drugs gave me a feeling of not caring about anything or anyone. I tried to fight the sensation. I refused to allow myself to become comfortable, so I bit hard into the flesh of my arm in the hopes of remembering what pain felt like. Comfort. That's what they wanted. The perfect prison is the one that you don't want to escape from. Through my narrow concrete slit of a window, I saw the sun grow dimmer with each passing day. A guard came to check up on me. I gave a weak smile at the sight of a real person. Our eyes met briefly as he shoved a tray of glop through my door slot. Oddly, he did not administer my daily dose of medicine. I slumped back onto my bunk and tasted the flavourless gruel. At first, I thought the guard had simply forgotten. But the same guard came every day, and every day he'd serve me the same porridge without my mandatory medication. I remembered an old article I wrote about how prison programs directed the guards to interact with the patients as little as possible, lest their fallible human emotions betray them and they become influenced by the people they've got locked up. Guards were supposed to alternate prisoners they visited, but my guard did not. I knew the guard was breaking a lot of rules, but I wasn't sure why. Was it a new form of manipulation? Then, one day, the lights went out in my cell. My door slid open, and a dark silhouette stood at the entrance. The guard stepped forward and seized my hand. I tried to pull back, but his grip was too strong. Then, I felt something strange drop into my hand.
Eat them, now, before the lights come back on.
What is it?
Chocolate.
What? I hadn't tasted chocolate in months. I was told that chocolate rations were now a thing of the past. Limited greenhouse space for cocoa trees was better used for staple crops. Expensive chocolate had to be imported from Earth. I heard the door slam shut, the lights turned back on, and the guard was gone. My personal hologram flickered to life and gave me a quizzical look as I chewed with my cheeks stuffed full of chocolate. I shrugged and swallowed. For the next few weeks, the same guard stopped by my cell. His name was Ethan, and he typically gave me sweets. And on one occasion, my hot shower rations were increased for no reason. Always the lights would go out when he arrived. Apparently, the high-ranking guards had the ability to turn the power to individual cells on and off. I figured it was for maintenance purposes, or more likely to give beatings to dissidents out of camera view. Yesterday, the guard finally spoke to me.
You're that famous reporter. I used to watch your channel, said Ethan.
Former reporter.
They say you know something about the Great Winter and? Rumour has it you have a ticket hidden somewhere.
I've been hearing a lot about these so-called tickets. What are they? When I asked the question, the guard's face became sweaty, and his eyes shifted from side to side.
I can't tell you right now, but if you have it, I'll get you out of here.
I've already been made that offer. Your hologram has already tried to manipulate me, and now you're trying to buy me off with an empty promise of freedom and stale chocolate.
Every ticket is for two. If I get you out of here, will you take me with you?
To where?
That doesn't matter right now, but time is of the essence. Yes or no?
I gave a mocking laugh. Get me out of here, and we'll talk. It was a cold night like any other cold night. when my cell room door slid open. The lights in my cell went out. I heard the guard step inside and his shoes squeak as he knelt down next to me.
Please tell me what you know about the Great Winter.
Why should I help you?
Help me, and I'll help you.
You can't help me. You can't help anyone. We're all going to die.
Not all of us.
I scoffed. What do you mean?
11 ships, the largest ever built, have already left Earth, and the 12th and final ship is about to leave Mars within 48 hours. 11 of the ships have already docked with a city-sized craft in orbit. The Central Authority says it's for a science exploration mission. They've done everything they can to downplay it. Everybody smells something.
And what do you think it is?
I think it's a mission to a different star system, a one-way colonization mission.
Why do you think that?
I know someone working on a ship. He's tight-lipped, but he has dropped me some hints.
The guard explained how the number of patients was increasing by the day. They were getting so many that they had to put most under permanent stasis, basically frozen alive. Apparently, even the guards weren't getting enough to eat anymore. I shrugged. So what?
So, the last ship is about to leave from here. I want to be on that 12th ship. A lot of people do, and you have a ticket.
The ticket holder is dead.
Doesn't matter. My friend told me that by law, each ticket retains the right to board that ship. The few people that have them are entitled to pass it on to their loved ones or descendants. My friend said I should get one of those tickets at all costs.
You're some random guy out to save his own neck, or maybe you're just trying to manipulate me like the holograms. Even if I had this supposed ticket, you'd simply kill me and give the slot to someone close to you, or sell it to the highest bidder. You must think I'm stupid.
I don't think you're stupid. In fact, you were the only reporter I trusted. It's not a trick. I don't have a family or anyone in my life, and I won't hurt you. In return, I can get us both access to the boarding platform, and we can get on that ship. It works out 50-50. What do you say?
I say you're going to have to make the first move. The guard said nothing and left. My cell room door slammed shut, and the lights flickered back on. The next night, I huddled up under my blankets in the corner of my cell. I could see my breath rise and dissipate into the air. The system had turned off my heating since I refused to talk to my hologram. It constantly bothered me about the location of the ticket in exchange for all sorts of things, even my freedom, which was a lie. I said nothing. If I said something, I would no longer be valuable, and if I wasn't valuable, I suspected I wouldn't stay alive, or worse, I'd be put in permanent stasis. As I shivered, my cell lights went out, and I heard the scraping sound of my cell door as it slid open. I saw a machine under the dim blue emergency lights in the hallway. It was an automated laundry rover. Ethan tilted his head toward the laundry rover behind him. "Get in. Cover yourself with the sheets," he said. What?
Ethan breathed heavily as he looked nervously down either side of the dark hallway. "Get in the laundry machine. Trust me."
Was he going to help me escape, get the ticket, and then kill me? I suppose I didn't have many options at that point. If it was meant to be an elaborate ruse, I was too desperate to care. I climbed inside the laundry container and covered myself with the sheets. I heard the click of a button, and through the white sheets I saw the main hallway lights flicker back on. As the rover bumped along the hallway, I heard men talking outside.
"Ethan, do you want me to check the laundry rover?"
Apparently, escaping via laundry rover wasn't a very original means of escape. My stomach knotted with worry.
No, I got it," said Ethan.
"I insist. I still owe you for filling in for me last week."
Next time.
Minutes passed, then what must have been an hour. I felt the sharp tinge of cold air. The sheets above me were pulled off, and I saw a starlit sky. I was outside. Ethan took my hand and pulled me toward a waiting car. Like I said, you can trust me. Now get in. I told the car where to drive. It reached the destination, and I walked into the dark alleyway. I found the loose brick and pulled it out. The ticket was still there. I thought about making a run for it. I knew that part of the district well, and I knew I could escape. But something nagged at me. Maybe Ethan was telling the truth. The thought occurred to me that I could sell the ticket in my hand for a level 1 vocation and a large dwelling in the best part of the district. But then a second thought followed. Even level 1 vocations were willing to give everything away for a ticket. I began to wonder if I should believe Ethan's story, or if Ethan would simply kill me and take my ticket. I took a deep breath and debated again whether I should make a run for it. I looked at Ethan and then down the alley. I could easily get away. I took another deep breath, and then I slowly walked back to the car. I stood before the vehicle and held up the glass ticket. Ethan stepped outside the car and looked up at it in awe. He held out his hand as if to reach for it, but I slid it into my bra. Ethan lowered his hand.
It's your ticket, Zoe. I won't try to take it from you.
We'll see about that. The car doors slid open, and we climbed inside. The car pulled up to Goddard Spaceport. The largest spacecraft I had ever seen stood high above the troops that guarded it. Hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps millions, surrounded the craft. The crowd was mostly made up of the lower classes, and to my surprise, many of them were holding a printed copy of the article I had written. It was at that moment that I realized I hated the level 1s and level 2s. I hated them for the opportunities they had because of random chance at birth, and because of the algorithms, a bunch of self-serving elites gamed to the detriment of everyone else, which they camouflaged with the authority of mathematics. I hated them for their better lifestyle, for their genetic and cybernetic upgrades denied to the rest of us, for their monopoly of our personal data, for their perpetual youth, for everything. Yes, you could say I had very much become one of the vulgar masses, the plebs, the seething peasants. And what good were the higher levels to someone like me? I had always thought hatred was a bad thing. In school it was one of the first things I was taught to push out of my mind. But at that moment, I felt my hatred was not only the correct emotion, but it was justified. The upper classes didn't think they needed us, and we didn't think we needed them. The hatred was mutual. I watched as a long line of passengers boarded the craft. It was clear who the passengers were. Vocation levels 1 and 2, scientists, engineers, government officials, and, of course, the rich, who officially didn't exist in our egalitarian system. People in the crowd shoved one another to get close to the ship. Several tried to push their way through the small cordon of troops surrounding the craft. Although there weren't many troops, each soldier was an army unto themselves. They were genetically enhanced with superior athletics and motor skills and had a far superior ability to multitask. If that wasn't enough, they also wore a form-fitting mech suit that multiplied their already impressive strength and protected them from weapons fire. Their implanted neural interfaces allowed each individual soldier to lead a squad of non-human mechanized troops. Unlike the police, each soldier had an empathy implant inside their head, which could be switched off upon command, making them immune to combat stress. The response to the people's defiance was swift. The sharp smell of sleeping agent filled my nostrils as the troops fired canisters of the stuff into the masses. Great swaths of the crowd lay down and began to doze off. The troops also fired sonic waves into the mob. Throngs of people keeled over, their mouths and their bowels simultaneously releasing their contents. Even though I was quite some distance away, I began to get woozy from the sleeping agent. Then I felt a slight pinch on my neck. Ethan had administered something into me. Was he making his move to take my ticket?
It will counteract the effects, he said. Let's move.
I noticed that most of the crowd wasn't falling asleep. Apparently they had planned ahead and administered themselves with the black market antidote like Ethan had. The noise of the mob was interrupted by the crack of gunfire. Microballs cut through the cold Martian air and pounded into the crowd. The small pellets of chemicals were designed to lodge in the outer layer of our skin. As they melted into your system, there was an intense sensation of your entire body being covered in crawling, stinging ants. Thousands fell to the ground, scratching their skin raw. Ethan took my hand and pulled me through the edge of the crowd. "How do we get on board?" I asked.
I once served with one of the ranking soldiers. He was one of the lucky ones allowed to serve as the ship's permanent onboard security force.
We worked our way through the crowd toward the entry gate and got in line as the riot police held back the angry mass. At that point, I had expected Ethan to push me aside and claim the ticket for himself, and maybe his lover. But to my surprise, he didn't.
"Pass," said the soldier.
I removed the glass ticket from my bra and tapped it against the interface. 2 green dots lit up. Ethan let out a long sigh.
"You're both good to board."
As we headed onto the ship, the roar of the crowd was interrupted by a sudden and strange silence. The chatter died down and the pushing and shoving stopped. Many in the horde tried to stand on their tiptoes to get a glimpse. I saw the General Secretary of the Central Authority. He was several meters in front of us, also boarding the ship. Attendants behind him carried what was obviously his luggage. It always amazed me how leaders can somehow make it to the top and still be tone-deaf idiots. While I was impressed with the General Secretary's high level of stupidity, I can't say I was surprised. I caught a glimpse of workers as they pushed a hastily assembled cart full of artworks. I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw Dali's melting clocks painting, the persistence of memory sticking out amongst stacks of paintings from the Central Authority's museum. People closed in and pressed against the perimeter of a chain-link fence lined by troops. Some began to climb atop it, only to be shot down with microballs of irritant. "Why are we out here and those people in there?" yelled a man. "What makes them so special? It's unfair," yelled a woman. The General Secretary stepped forward and gave a calming gesture with his hands. The crowd paused.
"I'm merely conducting a final send-off to our brave astronauts. Our scientists have informed me that the great winter will be over soon. I'll give a press conference when I return."
Despite the bitter cold, a lone drop of sweat worked its way down the General Secretary's brow. "Liar!" shouted a little girl, clearly a level 4. With that, the crowd changed, like harmless grasshoppers transforming into locusts. The pressure cooker the Central Authority had created suddenly exploded. People began to charge toward the ship.
"Deadly force authorized," I heard a soldier shout.
The soldiers' laser weapons cut masses of people in half. Starving and with nothing to lose, the huge throng of humanity charged over the bodies of the fallen and into certain death anyway. Then suddenly, the firing stopped. I noticed how the soldiers' heads all simultaneously jerked to the side. They all fell over, dead. Someone must have figured out how to explode their neural implants. Then their mechanized assistants froze and shut down. It was such a feat of cyber warfare that it had to have been done with the help of someone on the inside. One can only assume that certain members of the security force weren't happy about being denied tickets to the ship. The mob charged over the bodies, and the General Secretary found himself surrounded. His palms rose. Now, the 11th ship is coming back for the children. It's going to take all of them. I promise that—" Before he could finish, he was ripped from limb to limb with the bare hands of the mob. My heart nearly stopped at the sight of his head being tossed into the air in triumph. Ethan grabbed my arm and pulled.
We have to get onto that ship.
We ran around the remnants of the General Secretary and onto the ship. The passengers frantically tried to close the door of the spacecraft. We ran as fast as we could as the gap of the door began to close. Just as they were about to seal it shut, we managed to force our way inside. The people on the inside of the ship were in a tug-of-war over the door with the people on the outside. I heard the pounding of countless fists reverberate through the metal door. The interior of the ship suddenly filled with light. The door was flung open. It was too late. Furious people poured inside. We made the only choice that was available. We joined the mob. Slaughter ensued. It wasn't merely because we were drunk with power and bloodlust. We raged at the unfairness of it all. The scientists and engineers and organization leaders were all butchered. Their brilliant brains, full of decades of education, were splattered like oatmeal against the walls of the ship. Deemed a privileged class, not even the children were spared. Their limbs were torn off and put in backpacks, to be saved for later. The floors of the craft were covered in blood and mangled bodies. My group made it to the command center. Corpses of the command crew were scattered throughout. Some half-starved, skeletal people with wild eyes and nothing to lose began to fight over the bodies of the fallen. I looked out the command center's window at the dying sun falling below the red horizon. With no one left to kill, the crowd looked at one another. We all realized that no one knew how to operate the ship.